Hello and welcome back to the channel. My name is Nicholas and you're watching Old School Garage. Today I am going to be rebuilding these window switches. These window switches are out of my 1961 Imperial. Most of them were completely broken and were failed, and I'm going to get into that in a second, but I'm going to go through the step-by-step of removing this back plate, removing the toggle, and fixing the inner switch, the internals of the switch itself. Alright, first things first, this is a switch that I've already rebuilt. So I've already taken the time to pull it completely apart, polish everything, and fix the internals. The chrome on these switches are pretty decent. I didn't have to get them replated or nothing. If your switches are badly pitted, you obviously can get them replated at a local chrome shop or anything. Anybody that does all that kind of stuff. So the first step that you're going to have to do when you're fixing these switches is going to be removing the glue on the back of them. Now, I used my own glue. I don't know what the factory used. This is still a factory switch. I haven't touched it. You can see they're very close. Just the factory glue looks smoother. But mine came out all right. Not really going for looks, I just wanted strength to hold this backing plate with no issues. Now to prove that it does work, I'm going to take a multimeter, hook it up. That side works. Oh, we're touching there. I can't grab this very good. All right, there we go. So I fixed this switch, but this guy is also fine. So you might be asking, why am I going through the effort of fixing this if it's not broken? Well, that's where this captain switch comes in. When I got this captain switch, it had this JB weld all over it, and the JB weld was completely piled over the entire back of the switch. You can see how there's like a warp to the board, the circuit board, whereas the standard one is flat. So my thought is that this entire board overheated when it was being used. So someone was trying to roll up multiple windows at once basically, and it just heated this back plate up really quickly, because your power circuit is coming in this post, this center post, and then whatever direction you're hitting, there's a toggle that bounces back and forth between these posts right here, and it just sends the current through. It's not a relay system, it's not anything like that. This switch has current going through it, like the full current that's going to the window motor. So I had to fix this guy because this guy was completely torn up. Someone had already fixed this switch, fixed is in quotations there. And how they fixed it, grab some examples here. Here's the toggle I pulled out of the captain switch. You can see the contacts are burnt. See if I can get it to focus a little better. So someone went kind of crazy. This was not pulled out of the captain switch, but this was pulled out of one of the single switches. And you can see a big difference, but the brass contacts are still burnt. These outer contacts. All right, so let's get into taking this guy apart so that I can explain it a little bit better. All right, so the first step to get to the back of these switches is going to be lacquer thinner. Any lacquer thinner will be fine. I'm sure you can use acetone too. I just am simply using lacquer thinner. So you're going to want to take a small paintbrush, one that's preferred, like it's this fine, not some big brush, and you're going to dip it in the lacquer thinner, and you're just going to lay the lacquer thinner on the glue. This is going to start to break down the glue. You don't want to get too crazy with it, covering the entire board, because the board is paper. It's made of like a Bakelite type thing, and you don't want to break that down. It's not Bakelite, but it's an old resin board. Alright, so you can't really see it in camera, but in person, it's starting to look a lot more fluffed up, like the glue is getting loosened up. And you're going to want to take a pick, a small screwdriver, anything, and you're going to want to start to break the glue down physically. If it would dang focus. So you can see at that bottom section where I started scraping, the glue starting to basically wipe away. So I'm going to keep doing this until all the glue is completely broke up. If I need to break it up any farther, I'm just going to take a little bit of lacquer thinner, let it sit on there, and do more scraping. You don't need to let the lacquer thinner sit a long time and like soak into it, and it really does break down very quickly. And you can see it's not shiny anymore right here where I've already started breaking it down, because the glue is literally, I'm removing it. You're going to keep doing that. You can take a paper towel and just wipe it out when you get all scraped up. Now you can see I've removed the glue. That's how easy it is. The key when using the lacquer thinner is to keep everything wet, because the wetter it is, the easier the pick will slide around and break the glue down mechanically. Now, as you can see, majority of the glue is removed. So we're good to go on beginning our removal process. Now, there's a couple ways you can do this. I'm sure you could take a soldering iron and heat these little like dimples or whatever they use to help secure this resin plate. I'm not going to do that because my method that I've found, just bending them out, works. And the glue that I used is more than strong enough to hold the plate in, even with all the pressure being put on the switch. Because if you look, there's a slight dip when you press into it because there's some springs inside there. So all that I do is I've got these channel locks that are just very flat. They grip very straight, a very straight line. And I'm going to put them directly on that and pry just a little bit. Don't really care if I break it because it's not going to really affect anything. But like that. Now these side ones are much harder to get. That one's not perfect. Oh. This GoPro is really fighting me right now. Alright, do the other side. Now, yes, I am tearing the chrome up right there. There we go. This is very hard to do on camera. And these middle ones are super easy. On this guy, it's a lot easier because it's only crimped in a couple spots and there's no posts in the way. So you can, it's just like doing the sides on these smaller switches. All right, now we're going to take some more lacquer thinner. We're going to make sure we get the corners really good. Make sure it's bubbling up just a little bit, like the lacquer thinner sitting on the surface. Okay. Take your pick or screwdriver, and you're gonna keep scraping. You're trying to get those little grooves out, cleaned out, where you just exposed all of that. And you can already see the switch, at least I can. I don't know how it's coming across on camera. The switch is already coming out, the back plate is. All right. Now we should be able to see it. You can see it moving. You're just gonna gently pry up like that. All right, we have our backing plate out. Now, if you look in there, you will see there's a piece of brass, this little brass plate. The toggle itself, and then the little plastic piece. Now your switch is disassembled. Very easy. Take some time here, straighten these out just a little bit while you have better access. You can hit these back into place if you feel like you need to re-dimple them, but make sure you use a soldering iron to heat up that little area to push it back over. The person that fixed this one didn't, and they all cracked. So I had to grind out all of these little notches with a Dremel because they were all cracked and I couldn't get them to fall out correctly. And there was so much JB weld on it that didn't help. But all right, so we got that piece. The backing plate, you can see the contacts. Little brass piece again, which sits like this and acts as a spring. Two little springs on each post. And your toggle. This one is actually in great condition. This is the best one that I've pulled out so far. And the switch did have good connection on both sides, so I knew that. All right, so now that we've got it disassembled, we're gonna take some more lacquer thinner. We're gonna apply the lacquer thinner to the edges of the switch backing. I'm going to take a scraping tool. This is just like a cheap wood carving tool. I don't care if I get glue on it. You can use a screwdriver or razor blade. And you're going to take it and you're going to scrape all the glue right off. Make sure you get the sides too. All right, now you can see the plate, what it's supposed to look like. That's with all the glue completely scraped off, the sides and the front. Make sure you clean these contacts, take some Scotch-Brite to them, clean the grease off of them, and you'll be good. So we're done with that guy. This guy, just make sure you clean it. That's all you gotta do. Same with the springs. Now, this guy you can see is nice and crusty all the way around. It's even still got the factory grease in it. That's kind of cool. But you can see the ones that I have done are polished. So all that I've used is a flannel wheel on a 3rd horsepower buffing wheel, or a grinder, I'm sorry, at 1700 RPM, and just use some paint rubbing compound. So I'm gonna go clean this real quick. I'm gonna spray it with some degreaser, scrub it really good, dry it off, polish one side of it, and I'll bring it back and show you what it looks like. All right, so I have polished half of it. You can see there's some polish down in the groove here. Make sure I get that out. All right. That half I've polished. It's very hard to show on camera. and that side I haven't. You can see the difference. So you do want to polish all the sides to it. Make sure everything's polished so it's all even. It'll look better. And if you polish these little guys, the switch will be smoother because you're cleaning out this little groove right there. A lot of dirt likes to pile up right here, especially in the little corners, because when your finger hits this, it's pushing down, and all the oil, sweat, and everything that you're touching the switch with is going to work its way into that corner. So I'm going to finish polishing this entire thing, and we'll be moving on to the next steps. All right, there I go. I've got my little toggle here, or whatever you want to call them, all polished up. Came out pretty good. So we're done with that. That's one more thing we're done with. Now we're going to move on to this guy. So this guy, I'm just going to literally clean it with soap and water or degreaser, and we're going to polish it with some paint polish. We're not going to go crazy with it. You can use a buffing wheel on these, but you need to use like a liquid polish. Any chrome plating you can easily burn through on a buffing wheel, and then you're going to have a huge yellow spot in it, and where you can see where the chrome is worn away. So I don't recommend doing that. All right, here's my chrome bezel for the switch. You can see it's a lot shinier. Cleaned up very well. So that piece is also done. I've also, off camera, cleaned all this stuff, made sure it's looking good. We're good to go on that. So the next step is the toggle. Get the correct one. So this was the original one that came out of this switch. You can see very intact. If the switches are doing a whole lot of work, they're going to end up looking like this and needing to be repaired, like this one was. The most common thing I've seen, though, is the brass contact on the end wearing out. That side's bad. This side's not bad, but it's good. You can tell that this was the bottom where the window was going down because there's less amperage going through the switch. Now, I don't think that these are very good switches, and like they weren't made very well in terms of longevity. So what I have done is made a much chunkier version of almost double the thickness of copper plate, and then I also maintained much bigger brass contacts. Now this is not ready to go in yet. I still have to shave the sides down because the way I made it so that it's easier to make, it actually will hit the sides right now. They're not close, or I mean they're close. It'd probably work as is, but I'd rather it be perfect and not have any issues. So this is what I've made so far. I've made all of these. I remade, let's see, that's two. I made 6, 7 of these guys. So I've experimented a lot, basically, is what I'm getting at. These should last a lot longer. I just used a bunch of filler rod from a weld supply store, and then you can buy this copper sheeting anywhere. I'm not going to get into measurements because if I do decide to make kits someday, I'd like to keep that to myself at least. I do think it's unacceptable that the people who rebuild these switches sell them for $260 to $350 and up, rebuilt, and they're simply reusing, or not reusing, but they're buying kits, new old stock of kits where Chrysler would sell these and the springs and this little brass guy here. Chrysler would sell a little kit like this where it just came with all these pieces and you would swap the internals out and just do whatever you needed to fix the other side. They're not actually addressing the issue of repairing the contacts. Now, this is a very old vehicle, don't get that wrong. I mean, these lasted for quite some time, but the more that this brass contact breaks down, the more you're putting more stress on this copper plate and risking burning out, and the more you have to move this switch inside. So it's pivoting right there. The more you have to move this, and eventually it'll get to the point where you can't move it anymore. And you can actually see on this guy, let's see if I can get it's bent. It has a little warp to it like that, because people were pressing the switch harder and the copper plate was heating up, and it was bending this little piece, this little end. So I'd like to address that, of like actually fixing the issue and building it so that it never has to be replaced again. Now, these are just like me screwing around doing this stuff by hand. If I was to make a kit, it would end up being stamped out, and a lot of this stuff would be a lot less crude, and it would be more of a manufacturing mindset of making it correctly. This was just me doing it by hand. Like I said, using stainless filler metal. This is just 1/8 inch rod that I filed a little end down, drilled a hole in the correct location, peened it over, and then filled it with solder so that it's, first of all, extra strong. It doesn't want to move around as much, like through years and years of use after the copper heats up. And the solder will also give more ampacity to the metal. Or at least that's my mindset right now. I still want to do some testing and really like put it through its paces. Another thing, if you're having issues with these switches, make sure your window tracks are greased. A lot of people forget about that. There's little steel wheels down in the window tracks. Those need to have grease in them for them to move correctly. And if you're not maintaining that, over time that grease is going to dry up a little bit, and it's going to get harder and harder for that motor to push that glass up. It shouldn't make any crazy whining sounds. It should be a very constant speed. If there's ever like a point where the window's going down and it's going down like this, and then it slows way down and then it speeds up and drops all the way down, well, you've got a catch somewhere in that window track, and you need to address that, whether it's cleaning it out, spraying some soap or degreaser or anything down that track and rinsing it, or simply just re-greasing it, spraying with a spray grease can down in that window track to get it to move correctly again. The same goes for the motor. With if you're overworking that window, overworking the switch, you're overworking the motor too, and you're more likely to burn out the motor. So it's just little things like this that go a long way of making sure that everything's working correctly. So the next step for me, because I've already made this, I've already done this, and if you want to make these at home by yourself, like if you want to do this yourself, just copy Chrysler's design. Make sure that you have everything correct. The main thing you want correct is the centerpiece right here, which I gotta still grind this down a little bit, and then the distance between these two posts, and make sure they're centered over that center post. So what I did, grab it real quick, I made a little die, and the posts set down in that. As you can see, I don't want to go all the way because then I want to be able to grab it again. But I also did drill on the back side, so if it does get stuck, I can just tap it back through. You want to make sure that those are very exact, as close as you possibly can get. So it doesn't really matter with the angle of the plate. As long as it's close enough, you'll be fine. But the idea is that the contacts are touching that right there. That's all that this switch is doing. And once you get your height correct on it, you'll be fine. So you just got to find some copper sheeting, and then I actually used a paper cutter to cut this stuff out. Copper is very easy to cut. A big paper cutter. It cut very well. And then just hammer it out a little bit and you'll be fine. So the next steps for me are rounding this little guy over more, getting it to the correct height so that I'm at a good height for it, And then I need to grind these edges down and get them nice and even so that there's absolutely no problems with this touching the edges of the housing or the bezel. All right, so I'm back. I'm gonna do a quick little test to make sure everything's working correctly. I'm gonna drop the switch in. Need to make sure my springs are on it actually. This is just a test. I'm not doing a full. All right, there we go. So we're gonna hook our contacts up. We're gonna touch the casing real quick to make sure we're not getting any crazy grounds. Touch each post. Okay, we're not touching right now. That works. And that works. All right. So I just tested it with a multimeter to make sure everything works correctly. You can see how different it looks already. So we're going to pull it back apart. Now, one thing to note, and I do recommend this, you can use dielectric grease, but what I've found works is silicone oil. Take some silicone oil. And fill these holes up. And you're going to want to push it in. Make sure your posts are working correctly. They're bouncing with little pressure so that they slide freely up and down the shaft. You don't want anything binding or anything in the switch, because then what will happen is the switch will catch on one point and you gotta hit it back up. It'll eventually wear into place. This is all brand new stuff, but you want it to work correctly, you know, unassembled. So that when it's actually in the car, there's not stuff wearing into place crazy amounts. You're gonna wipe the excess oil off. Make sure you're not getting oil everywhere. Make sure it's working correctly again after you've wiped it away. Line up your contacts. Make sure everything looks correct when it's straight. So I've already checked. I know it's not grounding out. So my next step is to drop this guy in like so. Throw my little brass contact over. Now, because I did solder so much, that brass I need to make sure that this is in view. Because I did solder so much, this brass contact is going to float above that post a little bit. So you want to make sure it's straight when you put it in, like that, so that everything seats correctly. Once you have that, you're going to hold and you're going to put pressure onto this backing plate. All right, and you're going to shake it around. Do you hear anything weird? Do you hear, you know, something rattling around inside? Because if you do, then you missed aligning the switch correctly. As it sits right now, this switch should be straight. Now, the gluing process. I'm going to set this guy here. And actually, as you can see it here, it rocks because the toggle sticks past those ends. So, I have this high density polyethylene plastic. It's just scrap that I have laying around. You can use wood, you can use whatever you want. It just needs to be strong enough to hold everything intact and in place. So I just ripped a groove down the side of it. You can do that however you want. And for the captain's bank, this also fits on it. You need a flat bar or something like that so that it can push the entire piece down. But because this is not a captain's bar, you're going to want to do that. Give it a little bit better of an angle. Hope you can see that well. Very simple. All right, so now you're going to make sure everything is still seated. And then I might have to do this off camera because I need to do this on the edge. We'll see though. You're just going to line this piece up like so. And you're just going to tighten it to where it starts to get a little bit snug. And it should look like the old switch before you completely removed all the glue. All right. Now we're going to move on to the gluing stage. All right, so I'm just using this Loctite all-purpose glue, nothing crazy special. I'm sure you could use like CA glue or something like that and it'd be a lot faster. But I'm going to take this glue and my brush I was using to apply the lacquer thinner. And I'm just going to take it and I'm going to cram it with a light coat. Just try and cram it into each groove. This is very hard to show on camera. So if anyone out there would like me to remake or make kits that will work, by all means I'll consider it. I need to do some more making of some tooling so that I can do it quickly and efficiently. And I will be including more machinery type stuff and tool restoration at some point on this channel. I've got a couple lathes, a big Kearney and Trecker CSM mill, and I'd like to show that kind of stuff off. Make sure you clean your brush with some lacquer thinner when you're done. All right, now you're not going to remove this C-clamp until 24 hours have passed by, unless you're using like CA glue or something like that. The reason is you want this to fully cure. You don't want this to crack at all. So take your time with it, even let it set a couple days if you really are using some crazy stuff like JB Weld or something. Let it fully cure, because this will have a lot of pressure on it and you don't want to lose these parts down in the door. That would suck. So make sure you're taking your time with the gluing. If you want to peen these edges back over, I would glue it first like I'm doing right now. Glue it first where it's wet, peen it over and let it dry like that, and it'll be very strong. That way you're getting glue behind the metal, would be the idea of that. So that's how you rebuild a switch from a 1961 Imperial and a bunch of other Chrysler cars from the time. Again, if you'd like to see a kit made that repairs these, let me know. If you have any input on what I've done, of what I did absolutely terribly, let me know. I'm always trying to improve, but I hope you enjoyed it, learned a little something. Other than that, stay tuned for more content on the Imperial and all the other Dodge trucks. And I hope y'all have a nice day. Thank you for watching.